All right, let's do this. Great. Hi, everyone. I'm JP Miller. I've worked in tech equity for a number of years as a program manager at a nonprofit called MADEM, where we taught girls and youth of color STEM skills. I've been involved in education and mentorship for many years before then, during that time, and after. And we've put together a great panel here today with Tony, Lynda, and Eleazar. Al, I want to allow everyone a moment to introduce themselves, and we have Ron Rivers, of course, with us, who is going to be our moderator today. So if you have questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat, and we will do our utmost to leave a time for Q&A at the end of the conversation. So let's introduce our panelists. I believe, Tony, Anthony, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, JP, and folks, pardon if I dip into a little bit of a very white voice today. I'm not feeling particularly good, but that's okay. Yeah, I'm sorry. There's nothing worse than being sick during the middle of the summer. Tony Simmons, a philanthropic advisor, racial equity practitioner, who's sort of been able to use and leverage tech to advance the work of racial equity. I'm glad to be here today. I also note that I serve on 4 boards, 501c3s, all of them very, very small, but often very, very mighty. And so the ability to be able to leverage technology to do the work, particularly to sort of secure capacity support for organizations, is critically important for me. And so I'm looking forward to today's discussion. Thank you, JP. Hi,
Awesome.
Sasha.
Great to have you. Lynda, would you like to introduce yourself?
I'd be delighted to. So glad to be here. Glad to see wonderful, familiar faces. Lynda Dorman, president and founder of Dorman Group Holdings, which has been around since 2009, new iteration 2019, where we have provided services in the area of organizational development, project management, and business re-engineering. So we have been in the tech space for a little while, seen a lot of different dynamics occur, both for-profit academia, government, and the nonprofit sector, and dabbled in some business development along the way, I should say. And so I've seen a lot of challenges that are coming up in the tech space, the new tech with AI, with a lot of what's coming down the pike and the fear within our nonprofit communities, particularly our very small nonprofits that need to embrace this new technology and benefit from it in a number of ways. So I'm really here for the conversation and glad that it's happening. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. And Al, please introduce yourself.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for sharing your afternoon with us and being here. I'm Eleazar Adjehoun. I have been a nonprofit practitioner for the bulk of my career, having had the pleasure of working with a host of different organizations here in New York City, worked with communities that are impacted by mass incarceration and young people navigating the criminal legal system, worked with survivors of sex and labor trafficking, as well as with young people who are navigating homelessness, foster care, and psychiatric care, and have also worked for Tech for Good startup, Brasilia. And the common thread across that work is really thinking about ways to do a lot with a little, leveraging resources in service of community. Currently, I am working at the Knowledge House, which is a tech-focused nonprofit organization that is working to provide access to tech education and really diversify the pipeline of technologists coming from low-income communities. Had the pleasure of also working closely with a lot of folks on this panel and also co-authoring a white paper with Ron Rivers here, who's helped us stitch this together, titled New Frontiers, Intersections of AI, Web3, and Social Impact, really to set the table for conversations for us to think about what it looks like for us to collaborate with concerted changemakers to ensure that these technologies are leveraged for good. Thrilled to be here with you all.
Great, thank you for that. Well, thank you everyone for introducing yourselves. So we'll just set the purpose for this call. Our goal here today is to explore AI's relationship with social impact work. And so we've loaded this panel up with technologists who are not just thinking about technology, but are also thinking about tech equity and social impact and how technology is impacting our societies and our neighborhoods, our communities, and ways that we can use the technology to leverage it for good and to impact communities in a positive way, especially those communities that have traditionally been impacted by technology in more negative manners. We want to leverage the potential to co-create and co-govern a social impact model. So currently what we often see are models that are hierarchical, top-down corporate models where the playbook is to invite and then extract. And we invite until we reach a critical mass, and then we see extraction. And we've seen this a number of times in social media. We have seen this in many sources that appear to be open source, platforms that appear to be open source. And then once they reach an inflection point, they begin to close the walls, build up the garden, and begin to extract resources from their communities. And in this case, communities are millions and billions of people. We want to create models and explore about models that have co-governance from the beginning so that everyone has a voice, has a vote, and has a say in these matters, in these platforms, and these structures that we're building. And technology has evolved to a point such that we can build the tools that can be understood by people, not just technologists, but by almost anyone who is able to use a computer. And so let's get into this. We have a number of questions that we're going to walk through with the panelists and just have a conversation exploring these topics. So, we'll begin by just how do we define equity and how do we define tech equity, and would like to kind of in this framing that I've just provided, and we'll start with Tony.
How do we define equity? Well, equity is an outcome that cannot be predetermined by race, gender, religion, or any other identifier, right? So when we achieve equity, it's also a consideration for all the historical sort of impacts and accumulation, right, that have happened over generations, right? And so when we think about equity, and again, not within the financial sense, right, we're talking about equity within sort of the human sense of it, right? It is basically an understanding that we all have exactly what it is that we need, not to just sustain, but to thrive, right? And then we can kind of take a look at whether it's policies or practices, and actually we just don't see that occurring, right? And so for me, and then certainly for others who sort of been advancing the work of racial equity work, gender equity work, it really is the outcome that is not determined by that particular identity.
Lynda, what's your definition of equity or tech equity?
It's interesting because, and I've had this conversation recently and had to kind of boil it down to the ABCs of it, where it's everyone standing where they are and coming from a position of who they are, but equal at the same time, being able to access the information at the same time in the manner and ways in which they need it. And therefore it led to the conversation. That's just one part of equity, but in terms of tag teaming to the conversation around equity and tech, it's how do we enable that access so that it meets everyone's needs, regardless of who they are, where they sit, what role they play, what language they speak, what nuance within that language they speak, so that it is a communicative process and an access process that gets them to whatever need that they are trying to meet, and without any barriers of differences, barriers of opinions, barriers of, as Tony mentioned earlier, financial and racial, gender, and all other identities. It really just takes it takes none of that into account, but enables a pathway to achieve the goals that they've set out to achieve. And using technology to do that, we must create a concept around AI and tech equity in this technology space. It is very lopsided right now. And as I dive so much deeper into it for clients and for myself, I'm kind of shocked that we're just now really having this conversation. I appreciate Ron getting us and you getting us, JP, together to have this conversation and to build a platform that's being built so that we can ensure that those barriers are lowered, but more importantly, get people to the understanding that equity it's not a lost conversation, as some would want the masses to believe. because of the DEI mystique around it being busted up in corporate America. It's so embedded in society that it's not a conversation that's going to die out. It's going to come back with many different iterations within various sectors, and AI and technology and nonprofit and philanthropy is but one.
Yeah, it's an interesting point that this is almost a revolving door, so to speak, that we see, and this is a conversation that does continue to come up and is going to continue to come up until we get it right as a society. Eleazar, what's your definition of equity and tech equity?
Yeah, Lynda and Tony did an incredible job summing that up. I'll add a couple specific components that come to mind for me. I think of access, ensuring that everyone has access to the necessary tools and infrastructure, whether that's internet, computer, smartphones, but having it be affordable and accessible for communities. I think of digital literacy beyond just the access, ensuring that folks have the skills and knowledge and that it's provided in a way that is accessible to folks. So there are programs that are teaching folks how to navigate these emerging technologies, how to use these applications and understand this rapidly changing tech landscape. I'd also say it involves inclusive design, and excited for us to talk a little bit more about that too. But tech equity requires that technology is designed with diverse users in mind, folks across all different walks of life, and accounting for disabilities, languages, cultural backgrounds, and also ensuring that there's representation in the teams and ecosystems that are creating these technologies, and that we have an awareness of the biases and are integrating the elements of and asking the questions of who are we serving and who are we designing this for. And lastly, ethical use. And so having technology that we're using not just for dollars and for profit, but are also used to solve some of our most pressing social challenges.
Yeah, so tech for good, if we were going to put a slogan on it, in a way that's distributed. So thank you for that. Yeah, I'm hearing a lot about the need for systems, right? For systems that have an equitable foundation, and not to use the same word to make the definition, but are going to uplift everyone in the society, and we have safeguards in place and rails in place to keep communities thriving. So with that definition, I'd like to move on to our next question, which is, well, marginalized change makers and communities of color are presently being left out of these conversations and the creation of technology. And so what are you seeing with the communities that you're working with? What are the present struggles around AI adoption? And we'll begin with Eleazar.
Yeah, no, this is such an important topic, especially when we consider this present moment where our world is becoming more and more digital every single day. Each of us really have a responsibility to lean in and engage with this technology and ensure that knowledge and access is accessible to folks. Ron always says that the cost of inaction in this present moment is rising exponentially. And I think that the relationship between technology and equity is deeply intertwined and complex. And so when we think about the communities that I'm serving in my work, low-income communities, marginalized communities, at its core, technology, we all know the quote from Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. And at its core, technology is a powerful tool that can either bridge gaps or widen gaps in equity, depending on how it's designed and implemented. And so in my work, with community specifically at the Knowledge House, we're providing access to tech education and to tools to be able to ensure that communities aren't left behind. What I'm seeing in the larger sector and why we're having this conversation is that nonprofits, we are in a perpetual cycle of having to stretch capacity, having to stretch resources, and, to quote Tony, having to make a dollar out of 15 cents. And so there are inherently lots of challenges there, whether it's about trust and adoption, having access to tools that are designed intentionally to ensure that we're able to effectively deliver on our mission of amplifying impact, and also just greater accessibility and familiarity across communities, understanding how this technology can be deployed, understanding all the different opportunities and all the different alternatives that exist beyond our chat GPTs and our Geminis, and what the technologies that are more amplified in the general discourse. But I think that what I'm seeing is that there is an interest. There's so many eyeballs and attention that towards AI and these emerging technologies. And understandably, there's also a lot of distrust and curiosity about how this will change our landscape and how we navigate through the world.
I'm glad you said that. Can I just hop in, because
Yeah,
it's on me that, and I'm so glad you said that. Great segue about the trust factor, because I work with a lot of nonprofits of serving communities of color, and institutionalized anything just is, I'm so still stunned, but not stunned, but there still is a mistrust. So there's not a real concerted effort to look at, alongside the capacity issue, which Eleazar spoke about, with there's low capacity to do the things that need to be done. You don't have the right resources. You don't have the kind of staff. You don't have the skills. You don't have the funding, but you have the mission, the heart, and the will, and you have the constituency that need your services. So it goes back to almost a fundamental question. Do we have the capacity to understand how to bridge the gap and use technology for good that fills in this capacity gap? So whereas, I'm teaching my clients, you may not necessarily need a full-fledged fund developer at this point in time, because you said that you can't afford it, but you can know how to ask the questions, how to prompt for a sponsorship, how to develop that proposal, how to create those letters of ask, how to even get a strategy developed through the use of AI technology, and then sit and learn and assess what that means and customize to your needs. The equity piece comes in is that now we have to put the voice in there. We do not have the voice yet communicated for certain communities, particularly communities of color. It has a very interesting playing field if you use AI on a regular basis, as I do, and all those different ones that you mentioned, AI, Gemini, the whole suite of them. And I'm a heavy investor in it as well, by the way. So we've got some equity in terms of economic development. I'm just going to say that. But I did get some NIFTY before it split, so I'm glad about that. But I'm just saying, we're not in a position to push it down anyone's throat. But at the same time, I try to help them to really fill the gap and understand this is going to become not only your best employee, but a supplement to the staffing issues, not a replacement, but a need that you have to come into where you are now. You're not going to be able to go back to the days of having, superior budgets that are going to accommodate this massive staff and this incredible technology, unless you're smart about how you're going to use it all, unless you're exponentially growing because your services are growing, what you're doing in the community has a greater impact. Yes, you're going to grow in that regard, and folks are going to want to come to the table and fund you. But in this state, particularly for the small nonprofits, the mid-sized nonprofits, this is going to be almost their lifeline. I get calls of people who I had a scenario, and I don't know if this is time to talk about it, but where literally I'm on a phone call and they were just this nonprofit is having an absolute, almost emotional breakdown, not being able to get simple letters out for an annual campaign. They couldn't go on the internet and pull enough resources down. They couldn't hire the kind of staff and consultancies like myself that they needed to hire. I said, ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce you to something. We did a Zoom. I'm telling you, no kidding, within maybe 2 or 3 minutes, they had not only the full campaign developed based on some prompts that we put in, but the letters to go with it, the strategy to go with it. We even did charting so they can look at the financial run rate. I'm telling you, I became a hero overnight to these folks. And now they keep calling and I keep telling them, we now need to go into what the next thing that Eleazar said, and that is training. just basic training. This is not magic. This is technology of today. So we have to go to that level of conversation, get the folks trained, get them to a place of trust of the institution of using this technology, being actual, not only users, but critics of it as well, pushing the developers to develop what is going to be their voice for their sector, for their community, and making sure those prompts and those answers and everything else that's being engineered has that into consideration. And then taking a look at where we have some discrimination, where are we having some inappropriateness, where are we having that ethical lens, and how to participate in that conversation and be a change maker, and pushing AI and ethics closer to where we need it to be, because it is a wild, wild west right now.
Absolutely. That's a great story. And I like the pathway that you created from awareness, training, using, and then developing, and helping nonprofits go on that road, that journey from understanding how to use this technology for good for their communities, and then not only be a user, but to actually start creating and developing tools that are specifically for them. I think that's extremely powerful. Tony, let's hear your take on this.
I mean, Eleazar and Lynda have already made the case, right? It's challenges are around access, and again, a broad sense of access, right? It's also accessibility, right, for folks who need to be able to use it. So I'm not going to repeat anything, and so I'll just offer a scenario. And I'm going to date myself, and I don't care, but I recall going from big word processors, a brother word processor, to Microsoft Word, right? And the amount of time that took, and the amount of technical skills that were required, right? I mean, he had to learn how to use that. And now Word and the rest of most of Microsoft suites are just ubiquitous, right? Just you cannot do the work without it. The other thing I'll say too, and this is something I've been contemplating for a while, as I kind of look at my friends who are educators and their schools sort of banning the use of Chat GPT, right, in the classroom and the like, and it's because they want their students to learn. When I think about it, how much knowledge do I need to have in order to put a grant application together? Can't I just use an AI tool just to go ahead and list out and just develop my theory of change? So that way it's in there. Something that would normally take me a week to put together can be put together in, I don't know, a few minutes. Right. And so here's the other aspect that I am actually wondering might be a barrier to folks really being able to use it and embrace it. It almost becomes sort of okay, so there's a dirty secret in philanthropy. I'm just going to say it, and that is education. Your pedigree is really prioritized, sometimes more than your expertise at a particular issue. And so everyone is looking for the grant writer who can do it like a dissertation, but it's not necessary. You don't need to write a grant application like it's necessary, like you're going after your PhD. What it needs to have is the purpose and intention of your work and the funding that you need in order to do that work. So why not be able to use an AI tool to pull that stuff together, so that way you can spend your time actually doing the work and providing service for the community, rather than trying to figure out what Shakespearean piece you're going to put together to submit to a grant maker. Right.
And I would, I love that, Tony, because that is so true. And I do a lot of grants for a lot of folks, and that has been one of the things I've tried to explain to them. We're trying to get from point A to B. We're not trying to re-educate a whole sector around your services. They know your services because you've been invited to the table, or you qualify and you're eligible. I think sometimes we have this emotional access, not just access digital, to the tool itself, but the emotional barrier to say, this is not cheating. This is using technology for capacity, opportunity, for understanding how to be that much more competitive. You're not going to give something raw that you just get out from a prompt. It's another tool in your toolbox that really pushes you a little bit faster, a little bit forward, and can support validating, what you have said, can support, building a greater foundation where you have some gaps of understanding. It gives you that. And it really fast tracks your research. There's nothing wrong with that. So we have to come past this crazy emotional issue around, if I use all the tools in that AI technology toolbox to support my nonprofit, to support, you know, this and create equity, I'm cheating in some bizarre way. I've had that come back as a conversation, thinking, what? You know, and so there are, you know, you have to put the boundaries around what is that ethical lens, but at the same time, where does it becomes demystified when you're looking at how to use it for competitive use, as an example.
Can I just give just a really simple example that I figured? So if I've got someone in my house who's, let's say, working on my kitchen sink, right? And I see them using a wrench, but I notice that they've got a torque wrench in their toolbox. I'm gonna ask them like, you know, I need you to get out of here in 30 minutes. Do you think you could use that torque wrench that you got, brother? Because using that wrench is just gonna take too much time. And again, I expect that plumber to use the torque wrench because it's an available tool and it actually saves up time and it makes the plumber's job a little easier. And I know that as soon as he's done or she's done, that leak is not going to exist in my kitchen sink anymore because they use the available tools, the most effective tools, in order to get the job done. And no, I'm not going to be like, you know, I really want to see you just put your elbow into the whole entire thing for it. Right? No, just there you go. It's a wrap. Thanks, Lynda.
Yeah,
I'd love to pile on, actually.
All
Sorry,
right,
JP.
go ahead, pile in.
No, but we were talking about this recently, you know, back in the day when we'd hear that it's important to know Pythagorean theorem and all these mathematical components because we wouldn't always have a calculator in our pocket. And we just know that's no longer the case, right? And so this helps connect the dots for me as we are thinking about these technologies and these myths of cheating and, you know, inequitable access to tools that will make our job of solving problems easier. Just doing away with those myths and figuring out how to ensure that those that have a vested interest in solving these problems have access to all the tools and resources they need to effectively amplify those missions.
And then when we talk about disparities in communities of color, let's just use that as an example, in terms of education, in terms of financial literacy, in terms of another health equity. You know, you put someone in front of this technology and they have the ability to go into places they could never enter into in getting and extracting information, excuse me, that's going to give them a base knowledge and possibly more in how to address that health issue that they're not trusting their physicians to talk about with them, how to access and get information on all kind of opportunities in education that would no longer be afforded to them just by virtue of their, you know, depressed school systems. Now they have access to the whole landscape of opportunity. You know, we talk about financials, being able to understand financial literacy without feeling like you have to go through 15 million programs to understand home ownership and go through different programs to get your first mortgage that is targeted in such a way. So when we start to think of access, we're talking about access to actually accessing the tools itself in education. But now you can go through and say, here is a way to build equity because now all the information is available to everyone.
Yeah, well, these are great points. I'd like to kind of like circle up this conversation. There are cultural factors that we're moving up against. I saw a recent statistic from the Mazar report that 55% of nonprofits report that they're not using AI at all. Only 2% of nonprofit organizations have actually developed standards and guidelines around the usage of AI. And so it seems like this is a technology that nonprofit organizations and their foundations are already a step behind on without really understanding what it can do for them, not having that, they haven't even got on that first step of awareness yet, right? Or really understanding. There's the cultural. I lived in Texas for a number of years, and we had a saying doing things the cowboy way, which is to do it the hard way. If you have that torque wrench, you're not going to use that because that's not the cowboy way. You're going to use your fist first, and then you'll use the wrench once you can't use your fist anymore. And it's kind of a silly example, but we're coming up some of that ethos and that mindset, and helping our communities understand how they can use technology in a way that will benefit them, and actually in this case that not using it almost puts you on the outside of that, and creates the opportunity for that technology to be extracted in the future, right? So that's the concern, is that we need to create platforms that don't just rely on the existing players and these big companies that, like OpenAI, that's backed by Microsoft, or Google's Gemini, or the other platforms, like Twitter's Grok, that we are building foundations that have an equitable foundation in mind already, that has a cooperative foundation and has a co-governance model from the start. And let's build a model like that together. So rather than feeding in to the invitation and then extraction model again, it's the same. You fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. So let's not allow ourselves to continually be fooled and believe that just because it's a new technology, that the foundations are just going to change magically, and that these companies are just going to do the right thing. Let's safeguard ourselves and our communities and our nonprofits, and build a platform. And so this leads to our third question, which is about cooperative AI, and how can cooperative AI and this kind of the shift in the mindset lead to an eternal impact. And I can provide a brief definition, and then we'll pass it to Tony to begin this discussion. With cooperative AI, we're referring to cooperative AI as the development of a custom model that's collectively developed, owned, and governed by its community, and a public good intended to be put in the hands of many change makers as possible. So a public good is like your public works, electric company, or a grocery co-op that's owned by its members. Is AI itself can be a public good as well. And then the eternal impact definition is the idea of creating systems that work on their own without needing constant maintenance or people to keep them running. In the context of AI, that's about building a cooperative AI that operates smoothly, continuously, helps nonprofits without requiring a lot of technical know-how or intervention, and does not have that extractive layer built into its framework. So in other words, the profits perpetually further the protocol. And so Tony, I'd like to hear what you think when you think about these things.
Yeah. So okay, so I'm going to evoke a little bit of hip hop in this, but it's okay because that's what I do. Folks are familiar with the term FUBU, right? For us, by us, right? For us, by us, but most importantly, not without us, right? That for far too long, communities who lack the most, who need the greatest, normally have things done at them, with an understanding that perhaps I'm doing it for them. It's really not, right? You're mostly doing it at them without actually understanding those sort of really particular sort of finer details that communities need. No community is monolithic, right? Even within the community, there are no monoliths, right? So, there's a notion called targeted universalism, right? And it really is around sort of defining what those particular needs are across all of our communities and responding. And I say responding accordingly, right? And I think that's where we miss often, is the responsiveness of the tools, right? The tools themselves have to be responsive to the particular circumstances that any of our communities find them in. And the great thing about artificial intelligence, right, is that it's only artificial until it's actually informed, right? And so the best way to do that is actually have the people who need it to inform it, rather than this thing that we normally do and say, well, we think this is what they need, so we're going to give it to them and we're going to have them react, right? And then that reaction usually comes with the, oh yeah, that thing is cool. I don't know how to even use that other aspect of the thing. You're telling me that it's something I need to use. So you're going to have to actually show me, walk me through why it is that I need that particular thing. That takes a lot of time. And it's also incredibly paternalistic, right? So, you know, I think about any of the products. Again, I just talked about a torque wrench. The only reason why we have a torque wrench is because people were using wrenches for God knows how long. They're like, isn't there an easier way instead of me breaking my wrist constantly that I can do this? That I can actually sort of do this thing that I need in a faster, even more secure way, right? Great thing about a torque wrench is that you know you got that thing in there. It's really, really, really in there, right? And so this is just that thing that when it comes to technology, and you know, we can hold another conversation about the various biases that go in, because again, we also know that when certain users are giving feedback, their feedback is not then actually received and then responded to. It is usually, well, let's see how many more times we need to hear this particular feedback aspect. And then after some period of time, if 150 people have said, hey, I'd love to upload an Excel spreadsheet into my platform, folks are like, oh, okay. But you could have done that on day one because, you know, people need to upload their Excel spreadsheets, right? So this is what I mean. Like, in order for this work to actually really be done, the user has to be in the driver's seat. The technologists, all of us, we are the TA. We're the people who come in and provide technical assistance for it. But the folks who use it, they have to be the ones who actually develop it. And lastly, they have to be the ones who evaluate it and then offer revisions. And so, so for all of us who sit in the sort of technologists or like TA space, take a seat, listen, provide information when it's necessary, right? And then continue to build it. But at the end of the day, the people are the carpenters for this.
It's well said. You dropped so many quotes there. I was just catching them all. That's great. And when you say TA, I think teacher's assistant, but it's also technology assistant. But there's a lot of education that goes in this, right? That we're educating, we're bringing awareness, and then that point about users need to become the developers, and you get there through teaching and helping people understand. And now the tools that we use ourselves are recursive in that the tools, as you use them, can teach you how to use them. So Lynda, what's your take on this topic?
Oh my goodness, I think Tony just dumped the mother load on that particular question. Let me just say that. But you know what's resonating and coming out that I'll just ping and add in and open up a segue for Eleazar, because he mentioned this earlier, is the ethics and being able to really have this cooperative AI, because you're having so many people push into this development space, and being able to strain where we have some ethical breaches, where we have some nuances of not considering what the community really wants. And then also, how do we how do we actually monitor what is a community want in and itself, so that we get the best out of all that development space. We get the best out of how do we access cooperatively this AI and get this, the humans and the technologies and that ingredient working more effectively for the community in and itself, and for social impact in particular. So, this is an area that I'm actually still exploring, the policies of the United States, the policies at the state level, policies, and how do I help nonprofits develop their own policies around ethical AI use, around those who, if they have a large enough team or have an interested person, to actually creating and their guidelines on even their prompting strategies, things of that nature. How much do they use? When do they use? How do they contribute? Who do they contribute to? How do they teach that machine learning concept within their organization? And how do they push that technology into that development space? All of those things, can you imagine a nonprofit executive trying to figure out how to just get their payroll paid? And now we're we're putting them into a development space, but we have to because they need to be there. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. So they're going to have to understand how that actually plays out in not only the capacity, but their personal and professional responsibility to the greater community in terms of using this, and be a contributor, because otherwise you're going to sit back and it's going to be dictated to you. You're not going to have an opportunity to have that voice that is so important. And therefore, I do find some abilities to have different parts of the community that may not necessarily be as supportive of other parts of the community, galvanizing where we go with this cooperative AI, kind of almost decommissioning the mission of cooperative AI, if you will, by not having a real understanding and support of it all. So it's the ethics piece that's kind of resonating with me at the moment.
That's a powerful point. Every community is there's a lot of moving parts in the community, and your communities are going to want different things. And having the foundational ethics helps us navigate those different needs and prioritizing and coming to a common truth. It's ethics. And right now we don't have ethics, right? So, for example, OpenAI completely disbanded their ethics board, has recently brought in an NSA person into their board, and NSA is not really known for having strong ethics. And so it feels like this foundational concept and this foundational practice to build stronger community is totally out the window. And what does that create? It's almost a dangerous approach.
Polarized use and decommissioning the whole entire concept, which is the beautiful nature of cooperative AI. And it really is it's an imperative. So we're going to have to figure this thing out, and we're going to have to do it in a cooperative and collective way. There's no real choice, or we're going to find very, very, very uneven conversations and access opportunities. And therefore, we circle all the way back to the original conversation around equity. This is where we have some real potential of creating communities that are disenfranchised based on the fact that they're not able to cooperate and come to the playing field because they don't understand, or because they've been marginalized, or because the ethics has pushed them out from the conversation, or because they just are not willing to participate and be cooperative because they're just stuck within their four walls of their tech ecosystem.
Amazing. Thank you, Lynda.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Elle, let's go to Elle, and then we'll have a quick demo of Nonprofit Navigator and the equitable AI platform that we're building. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is such a rich conversation, and this time is flying by. I'm really enjoying this. And in hearing the distinction between cooperative AI and some of the more standard models, it really reminds me of what brings so much of us to this work in this social impact sector, doing work where our focus is on amplifying impact, eternal impact, versus enriching shareholders. And so in creating something that is informed with equity in mind, that is informed by communities, and ensures that some of the barriers to entry, the reoccurring friction that exist, what are the challenges that are preventing folks from wanting to engage and adopt this technology? It's the ethical and bias concerns. Where is this information and the data that's being collecting? Where is that going? Who is it going to? We understand that AI systems, as so many other systems, they perpetuate and also exacerbate the existing biases. And if those aren't carefully managed and accounted for, then we don't want to be using the same technologies that are oppressive and reinforcing so many harmful biases and structures. And we can also appreciate that trust and buy-in is something that, with any sort of new frontier, new technology, for good reason, we have to be mindful in how this is being leveraged and where the blind spots exist. And so for stakeholders at nonprofits, at foundations, we address the fear of AI, particularly around job displacement, the ethical implications of using technology that may be informed with harmful data points. And by creating something that is cooperative and that is really informed by the communities that are leveraging these technologies, we're able to ensure that there is a shared goal that is in mind, and we are moving towards iterating this technology to achieve common objectives. There's an emphasis on collaboration versus competition, where organizations are sharing information, sharing location-specific insights that might not be accessible. We're really leaning on the expertise of folks that are on the ground serving communities, versus folks who are pulling information and that might have that academic know-how, but don't have those lived experiences, those that practical experience of doing the work. And what feels most salient too is transparency and trust. When there are multiple fingerprints that are guiding the development and the provisions of the ethics of cooperative AI, there are more provisions in place to ensure that the concerns around safety, around ethical use are being addressed and are a critical component of how the technology is designed and deployed. And so all of us have a vested interest in not just using this technology, but ensuring that it doesn't use us and that we don't become the products. And so by opting into alternative models that allow for our collective voices to inform direction, we're in a place that more closely aligns with our values and that shared objective of leveraging this technology for good.
Amazing. Thank you. That's amazing. I think that's a perfect segue into Nonprofit Navigator. We'll hand it over to Ron Rivers if you're ready. And
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Thank you, JP. This has just been a phenomenal panel. I really appreciate all of the insights. For those of you I haven't had the chance to personally connect with, my name is Ron. I'm one of the engineers behind our effort. And if you haven't already kind of gotten the gist, our panelists today and myself are part of a cooperative who are trying to do this the right way. We're trying to build that vision of cooperative AI. And what I'm going to do very briefly is just kind of show you a brief overview of what we've built. The product is live. We have nonprofit users. And I'll kind of talk to actually some of the questions. Ryan, you asked a really great question. I think actually some of our existing infrastructure answers some of that question of how we do these, how we do it equitably in hyper-personalization, localization, etc. But let me just share my screen very briefly. So essentially what we've built is a custom AI that has hundreds of hours of meta prompting and infrastructure built on top of multiple models. And our vision is basically that, as our panelists have kind of shared, how do we build something from the ground up that is specific to the social impact sector? Something that is not only specific, but also embodies our values, and then most importantly, exits to our community, right? So we want to, as we've kind of talked about today and throughout the several questions, is kind of create this public good where an extractive layer to prioritize the profits of a handful of executives is not in the equation, right? So something that can truly act in the interest of its users and have those users, whether they be funders or stakeholders, in the top of mind. So I'm just going to go over it real briefly. Let me just share my screen. Here we go. Let's share this window. Wonderful. And I believe everyone can see. So we built this really easy to use interface. It's a chatbot. I mean, there's nothing revolutionary about that. But what is different about Nonprofit Navigators is a few key points I want to emphasize. Let me just make my screen a little bit. There we go. The first and foremost is, as it's been talked about today, one of the key barriers to access an agency for social impact change makers is fear, a lack of knowledge and experience, and just how do I even get started with this? It's very foreign, it's different. So at Nonprofit Navigator, we've built an AI that will actually do training for the users while they use it, and we do that through several ways. So first and foremost, I'll just show, you can see at the top, it says, oh, do you need help? Type NP Nav training, and I'll guide you. So I'm just going to actually put that command in. And it's going to think for a little bit. And then what it's going to do is return a pretty robust training infrastructure. So it took about 4 seconds. And what do we have? We have an introduction to Nonprofit Navigator, how it solves problems, like what areas to focus on. It teaches our users how to create effective prompts, how to improve the interaction. So how do you improve continuous history-based interactions, exploring topics, and interaction etiquette. Don't say please and thank you. right? It's not necessary. And then some advanced techniques it gets into. But more importantly, I'm going to kind of scroll down. I want to emphasize this component right here. What Nonprofit Navigator does is recursively prompts the user to deepen their questions, deepen their thought about what they're trying to accomplish. So they learn by doing. So they may ask a question and they may say, oh, okay, like it's very general. And then the Nonprofit Navigator may say, well, hey, if you tell me a little bit more, if you want to dive into a specific area, we can do this. So let's pretend I've just read this. Maybe I want to write another prompt. Maybe, help me create a marketing plan for my after-school program nonprofit. Something super generic, right? But what I want to emphasize is not only the depth of content it can provide immediately, but also the recursive nature, again, of that training. So we've built in this training to ensure that nonprofits, even the most tech adverse, are able to not only learn and gain from this model, but also develop their skills as they use it. Because I think, and I think many of our panelists have expressed, that we cannot have genuine co-creation of AI until historically marginalized communities are active participants within it, right? It's going to be impossible to meaningfully contribute if they're not familiar with how to use these techs. And I think as Lynda mentioned, right, while there is fear, there's no other alternative, right? Like the tech equity grab grows wider every day. And the cost of inaction, as Elle mentioned, is just growing every day as well. As these models become more advanced, the farther you become from interacting with them, the more far behind you are in kind of bringing this to your use. So it's just developed an entire marketing plan you guys can see. And then what does it ask? It says, do you want me to assist with any specific part? Do you want me to develop a marketing calendar? Do you want me to create social media content? The AI returns tools, it returns tables, it also returns sources. So I think, Ryan, to your question, if I can steal some of the panelists' thunder and just kind of dive into that a little bit, in terms of how we enable hyper-personalization and localization. Data sovereignty is the source component. So I can just type a prompt real quick. How does blockchain impact my nonprofit? And what this will do is it'll not only talk in depth about that, because we have a huge custom database, but it'll also provide a source, and I'll show you what those sources look like. But also, to your point, while this is generating, I just want to share, how do we enable hyper-personalization? So one thing we've done at Nonprofit Navigator in our kind of co-op model is allowed our partners, our funder partners and our consultant partners, to submit new content. So the way they do that is, I'm just gonna wait for this prompt to finish and just show you, let's see, and here's how it's sourced. You're gonna see this learn more come up. So this is like what one of the sources looks like. And then if I click this source, it'll take me off the site. Right? It'll take me to the actual source of where it got that information. But I do want to emphasize, everyone, this is curated content. And that's a huge part of a specialized AI. Is we have a team of people who are, I think between the panelists, there's probably over 100 years, if I include myself, maybe a little less than that, of like nonprofit experience combined in various directions. So it really is kind of getting experts together to kind of build meaningful content. And if I go to, I'll just show you real quick, whoops, the wrong one. This is like the dashboard. So we've built in dashboards, for example, for funder partners. We have foundations we've been talking to, giving circles. And I just want to show this add resource component. Anyone can click this button. It opens up a new tab, and here they can submit new content. So if a funder is developing something they think is really relevant, especially in the context when we think about equity, right? Like the AI doesn't need that much help with hard skills. Like it doesn't need you to submit an accounting template. But there are cultural components, especially the localization components, Ryan, to your question, right? Like how does a rural youth development nonprofit navigate their space as opposed to maybe an urban youth development nonprofit? Those are two different cultures, two different cultural contexts that need to be developed. And I think that's where this kind of co-op model of co-developing the AI really comes in handy, and why we're relying on our partners to kind of help support us in this model in doing that. So they can submit new content. It's really simple. All the content is vetted, just to be clear. We don't automatically add it to the AI. We want to avoid attacks, if you will, people putting content that might not be ideal. So I think this method also supports hyper localization too, right? The idea is if you are a let's say a funder or maybe you're running a giving circle and you want to have specific requirements, you can put those requirements in. And then so long as your prospective grant partners know how to look for them, they can access that immediately local data. So I think that when we think about building an AI for us and by us, to Tony's point, like it's about like enabling that hyper localization, that hyper customization, but also empowering those who are supporting, whether they be the nonprofit executive directors, foundations, giving circles, or consultants, to add their own vision, their cultural context, to kind of help build those soft skills that the general models frankly just don't do a great job at right now. And I think that's kind of where Nonprofit Navigator and this kind of cooperative vision comes into play. I'm going to wrap it up because obviously I get excited about this, but I do want to share ultimately that our highest level vision and why we call this a cooperative is twofold. First and foremost is all the participants have perpetual kind of equity stakes in the value they create, but also more importantly, our vision is to exit to community. And JP talked about this briefly, right? The idea that we can build a product that does not have an extractive layer. So all the revenue it generates does one of two things, right? It goes back into building a better product, building better protocols, making it better for the users, getting that nonprofit feedback, getting that funder feedback, and then also reducing the cost. I mean, ultimately, the vision is any 501c3 should begin their journey with the most advanced tool on the planet in their pocket. And if they're not doing that today, they're falling behind. And I think that's really where our vision kind of comes into play. So I'm going to pause because I have said a lot. I'd love to, JP, if you want to pass over and see if anyone wants to field any questions. I saw Catherine had another question, and we can kind of go from there.
Yeah, Kat, I think we've answered all the questions in the chat to this point. So if anyone has questions, please drop them in the chat, and we'll do our best to answer them all. We are coming up on time. We want to be respectful of your time. Catherine asked about environmental. She's working with the Environmental Justice Org and is looking for platforms that align with their values. So like a green AI platform. Nonprofit Navigator, how green is it, so to speak?
Yeah, I would say right now we're, as green as any other AI platform. We haven't done any specific initiatives. I think that's really insightful. We're just not there yet. We are a fledgling. We just started. We do have nonprofits on the platform. We are in conversations with several funding groups between foundations and others who are looking to kind of sponsor at scale. Because I didn't mention it, and this is not really, it's not intended to be a pitch, but the price point is like 1/13 of the cost of a traditional capacity building engagement. So it's just, the idea is how do we get it in the hands of as many people as possible? But my hope is as we kind of build more relationships and have co-governance, because that's something we're doing from day one, is like participating partners have the capacity to attend a monthly governance meetup where we talk about the direction, and then we get that feedback. We solicit that feedback to how we should direct ourselves, because we understand that governance is not something that we can just do. We can't snap our fingers and one day, we pass over governance, right? This is a process that we learn to do together over time. And because if you guys are in this webinar, I imagine you like AI, right? Every 6 months, there's a paradigm shifting model, right? So it's like, how do we kind of keep pace with this and develop the tools necessary? So I'll pause there.
Thank you. Yeah, so Ryan asked a question, so we'll address this. It'll probably be the last one. I think maybe we have an offer for anyone that's listening here today, and I'll let you address that as well, Ron. So Ryan's question is, sounds like a great model for employees' ownership, especially in public and private model with rural innovation hubs. Could you speak to nonprofits' partnership with for-profit and how this may be facilitated?
Ryan, can I ask a clarifying question? I don't want to put you on the spot, but are you asking in general, like nonprofits dealing with for-profits, or specifically with Nonprofit Navigator? I agree, Shahid. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. So my question is sort of with Nonprofit Navigator. Sounds like it's setting nonprofits up to navigate the grant application process. And so my question is in regards to other sources of funding. Some big companies even have nonprofit arms that have funding sources, as well as in the private space, a variety of projects coming to offer funding or even equity models to take applications for grant-like engagement. And so I'm curious if you're pulling in sort of other resources to help nonprofits identify non-governmental sources of funding that may operate in similar fashions.
That is a great question, Ryan. I would say in the immediate present, the answer is we don't have a ton of stuff for like corporate funding. It's primarily traditional grants, traditional nonprofit stuff. But I love that direction. We add about, between the submissions and like just our internal team, about like 10 to 20 new documents a week. So I'm gonna literally put that on our list and do some research, because I think that's really insightful. And this is exactly what we're talking about. This is why the co-op model is so fun, right? Like that's super insightful, totally overlooked it. And I think that'd be really valuable. I think that's our hopeful vision with this, is like, how do we build this as a public good so everyone is incentivized to contribute for the intention of, again, exiting to the community. Like that's the whole purpose. It's just govern it. This is not like, we're trying to build $1 billion start. We have no VC, right? That's why it's a co-op. We didn't do that intentionally. All of us in the panel have had our own experiences with tech for good that's VC backed, and needless to say, it wasn't that great. So we're trying to do it a different way. We're like, how do we just do it from the ground up the right way in a cooperative model? But to that point, and to JP's point about the offer, if anyone is interested in trying out Nonprofit Navigator, because we're happy to put it to the test, you can connect with us, whether it's through the support. I threw our LinkedIn's in there, but just DM me. I'm happy to set you guys up with a free trial, right? We're that confident we've built something special. We want you to try it. We've been actually putting together some case studies against like ChatGPT, and I'm very happy with the results. We're going to share it sooner than later. But I just thank you all to our amazing panelists. This was just really incredible, and we will be sharing the recording of this webinar. So in case you missed anything, you can get it. But yeah, I just thank you all so much. Lynda, Tony, JP, thank you so much for just making this happen, and all the attendees. Really appreciate you. And Lynda, I totally agree. More dialogue to come. So keep an eye on the cooperative, and thank you all so much.
Thank
All
you,
right,
everyone.
Take care. Stay cool.
Thank you, Ron and JP.
Thank you all.
Catherine, I'll send an email shortly after about how to set up that trial. So we'll get that ready to go. You'll receive that before the end of the day, and we can be in touch.
And Fiona would like a trial as well.
Wonderful. JP, yeah, that's awesome. All right, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.